This is False Start, a college football podcast for everyone and everyone else. I'm your host, John Buhler, lead writer for FanSided. As you can see, I am flying solo like a cup here with Cody Williams, content director, fansided.com, at the Final Four, doing whatever he's supposed to do as a TikTok short video mogul star out there. So he'll be back on the program on Wednesday. That will be my final show before me and the Arizona State podcast go to Germany for the better part of April, if you will. I'll be back on for 3 yards in a cloud of punt after the first round of the 2026 NFL draft. So I'm doing this. Cody will be on the show on Wednesday for Thursday, and then he'll be kind of driving point here until I get back from a trip of a lifetime. So yeah, we had a thought that we might be able to. I might have to do this solo like a cup just because this trip popped up very quickly and he had to act on it. So I get it. Even though I'm the one who's covering the Final Four predominantly, that's neither here nor there. Before we begin, be sure to hit that like button, smash that subscribe button. Give this thing a 5-star review on Apple, Spotify, YouTube, anywhere there's podcasts. It really helps the show grow. And again, we're having a good time here. And on that note, let's get started and rolling with our first and 15 because we obviously false started with that's my quarterback. Sonny Dykes and Curt Cignetti have differing thoughts on Josh Hoover. Obviously, the former TCU quarterback is now at Indiana. Indiana has been very portal heavy at the quarterback position the last 2 years. They went with Curtis Rourke out of Ohio 2 years ago, made the playoff for the first time ever. And then last year they went with Fernando Mendoza out of Cal, went undefeated, won a national championship, their first in program history. Obviously, Hoover played for Dykes in Fort Worth for 3 years. And here's what he had to say on the matter. He said, look, numbers are numbers and stats are stats. I think Josh started 31 games here as a quarterback, and we turned the ball over 40. He turned the ball over 42 times in those 32 starts. And you look at Gordy was the offensive coordinator last year, Connecticut, and their quarterback turned the ball over twice. So obviously with Kendall Briles leaving I'm trying to think where's he going? I can't recall, but you bring in Gordon Samus there from UConn. That's going to potentially help the quarterback room there in Fort Worth. And we'll touch on Sonny Dykes a little more because he got paid, and that'll be our next segment here. Cignetti followed by saying, we got to clean up some of the turnovers, obviously, which Coach Dykes made light of. But when Josh got here, he met his two new best friends, great defense and a really good run game, and he was never the same after that. I think it's also interesting. Hoover committed to Indiana as a high school recruit in 21 before signing with TCU. So that's all very interesting. Look, water's going to find its level here with Josh Hoover, and I'm going to be straight with you. I'm not going to buy into him until I see what he can do. This is a guy that threw for a lot of yards, threw for a lot of touchdowns. The wins were there, but they were kind of more of the empty calorie nonsense there in the Big 12. Since he came to TCU, and since he really took over for Max Duggan, has TCU made the playoff? No. Have they been in the conversation for it? Not really. Arizona State made it in 24, and then in 25, you had Texas Tech be a big player there. And when we look at the Big 12 moving forward, Cody and I obviously usually break this thing down to quartiles to kind of figure out, okay, where do we feel these teams land? I think if we look at the top quarter of the Big 12 right now, you've got Texas Tech, BYU, firmly at the top. And then there's teams, vying for that conversation, like the next 3 to 4 teams there, whether that's Arizona State, Arizona, Baylor, TCU, Utah, what have you. But TCU, there's also been some stuff that I've kind of been worried about financially with them. And again, it remains to be seen what that will become there in Fort Worth. But look, Dykes had a lot of success with Hoover, but not to the degree that like he probably wanted. And all the stuff that has like the whole Heisman Trophy offseason, who's going to be favored to win the thing? Like I've seen Hoover be third behind CJ Carr and Arch Manning. First off, I don't think any of them are going to win the Heisman. I think you got to have somebody a little bit different who's got to kind of carry the weight a little bit more. That's kind of why I've been more, on the idea of Dante Moore winning it out of Oregon, or could Trinidad Chambliss plays out of his mind there for Ole Miss. Maybe he's a consideration for it. Maybe Brendan Sorsby coming over from Texas Tech, Connor Stockton to Georgia. You know, Jeremiah Smith, Julian Saint's the only guy who's back who was a Heisman finalist a year ago. I wouldn't rule it out if he won that. I mean, right now Ohio State's my pick to win the national championship. So, what I think is really important here is like, look, obviously Cignetti is gonna back Hoover, whereas I think Dykes kind of, threw some shade at him on the way out. I think they both have enough reason to say these sort of things. What is interesting to me is like I this is an insane amount of pressure on Josh Hoover. And I don't necessarily know if he's built for it. Look, I think with Rourke coming over, he won a lot at Ohio U. And Indiana wasn't really Indiana prior to that point. So anything that he was doing, yeah, it may have been untrodden territory for the Hoosiers, but like we weren't like praising him quite like we did with Fernando Mendoza. Mendoza faces a lot of pressure now in the NFL. He's going to be number one pick by the Raiders. Kirk Cousins is going to back him up. It's going to be time there in Las Vegas and everything like that. I don't know. It's very peculiar here, and I don't know. Like I'm sitting here thinking like, look, do I think TCU is going to make the playoff next year? No. Do I think Indiana is? Yes. Do I think Indiana is going to repeat as national champions? No. I'd probably take the seven other teams who I think are probably going to be back to win it more likely than them. That would be Ohio State and Oregon out of the Big Ten. That would be Georgia out of the SEC. That would be Texas Tech, Miami. And then, you probably got two other teams there with Notre Dame and Texas, who I think are close. I think I like their chances of winning it all more than Indiana, but I'd be stupid to say if Indiana's not going to make the playoff. They're going to win 10 games next year, maybe 11, maybe even go 12 and maybe they're just never going to lose again. Maybe that's just the simulation that like the world's all gotten to this point just so we can see Indiana not lose another football game for the rest of the time. But yeah, I don't know. I feel like it's okay for them to have differing opinions on Josh Hoover, but one of them is going to be more right than the other, and it's going to be fascinating to see how that all shakes out. And on that note, where's the money, Lebowski? Sonny Dykes got a multi-year extension to keep on keeping on there at TCU. He and the Horned Frogs agreed to a multi-year contract extension on Friday. Dykes had been under contract through 2028, and his last salary was listed at 7 million. Look, TCU is a private school. This doesn't necessarily have to be publicly disclosed. Maybe his agent will put it out there, but TCU has gone 36-17 since Dykes took over as the head coach of TCU in what 22, including a college football playoff appearance, national championship game. The 36 wins is the most by a Big 12 program over the last four seasons. That kind of caught me by surprise. Like they haven't really they pulled back, I think at 24 or 23, I think, went 5-7, but like 25, 24, like they won about 9 games or so. They went 9-5, 9-4 last year. They beat USC in the Alamo Bowl. Sonny Dykes said this: the opportunity to pursue a national championship, the college football playoff, and the Big 12 championships exist right here in Fort Worth. My family and I, as well as our staff, are excited to continue to pursue that as Horned Frogs. And then he said, I think TCU Athletic Director Mike Buddy says competing for a national championship and Big 12 championships requires the right leadership. Sonny has proven that he is that person. His track record on the field, his standing in the community, and the decisions he's made to this position to pursue those goals speak for themselves. First of all, TCU is going to clobber North Carolina and Ireland to start the year, but also, Hoover transferred, and Kendall Briles has left for South Carolina. I knew he left somewhere. He's replacing Mike Shula there for the Gamecocks. We'll see if he gets the most out of the Norris Sellers. But you've got Harvard transfer, Jaden Craig coming over. He's probably the favorite to win the starting role in TCU. And look, I think the big thing here for me with this is like maybe like Dykes has been good, surprisingly. Like I think we had such an outlier season in 22, and you pulled back massively in 23, and then 24, 25, you've been pretty good, but not great. What I'm intrigued by is I don't necessarily know if TCU is going to put the money that they need to be great in college football as much as they probably should have been. Look, the this century has been very kind to TCU. It starts with Gary Patterson taking over. You got Sonny Dykes here. You've had two coaches for 25 years. Most people don't have that luxury. When you have a program that does this, what Georgia, namely, like Iowa's only had one, but like you have a level of stability there that you can build upon. Not to say that TCU is getting a place in here because I don't necessarily know if they could do better than St. Dykes, but you look across the board at the Big 12. Texas Tech has so much money. It's a public school. They have to disclose everything. They've also got Cody Campbell, drill baby drill. Baylor, their big rival, they've known to put up some money. They've fronted a lot of stuff, both on basketball and football over the years. I'm trying to think who else. Houston, Tillman Fertitta owns that program, but like he's the biggest booster there. He owns the Houston Rockets. He owns Landry's. He may be, in the 60s and everything like that, but TCU needs to be prepared for Houston making a huge charge. When Houston got moved up to the Power Four, Cody and I knew that like it was only a matter of time before they figured it out there. Harris County has more blue chip prospects than anywhere else in the world. I don't know if you've ever seen a map of Greater Houston, but it's larger. The sprawl of Houston's bigger than Rhode Island. It's so dumb. It's so dumb. It's unbelievable. But like my concern is I think anytime you kind of give somebody a big extension after doing good but not great, that usually backfires you. Look, I'm not saying this is going to end up like Luke Fickell there at Wisconsin because he wasn't even good and he got an extension. But I had some trepidation about Dykes entering this year. I'm like, okay, the game's changed. Can you can you get another team that's like playoff caliber? Maybe the team for TCU is this year, maybe next. But you don't want to become the Big 12 version of Auburn where you're chasing that once every 4 years. And then you're like, okay, maybe every 6 years. Okay, maybe every 8 years. And then you realize you've just wasted a decade. And I'm not saying that's going to be the case with Dykes here, but like, I feel better if they had Hoover back. But also at the same time, he was inherently reckless with the football. That's something that Fernando Mendoza had like more touchdowns than incompletions in games. Like the most accurate passer I've ever seen. Um, and we wonder if that's going to work out there with Hoover being in Mike Shanahan's offense up there in Bloomington. But it's I think Dykes has earned a little bit like a longer runway here because and again we'll touch on 2022 TCU later on in the program here when I'm flying solo like a cup, but you also have to wonder, is this really the best allocation of resources for TCU? They have money, they don't have enough. And in this wild, wild west, in the wonderful world of NIL, I don't see how you're going to compete financially with public schools like Texas Tech or Houston and State who are they're just gonna pay an assload of money. And then obviously you've got other schools in the conference where like they've proven to be expensive. I mean, hell, look at BYU. They almost bankrupted Crumble Cookies to make sure that Kalai Sitake would not leave for Penn State. Who knows what's going to happen when he wins a lot of games this year and somebody else comes calling and they got to basically bankrupt Swig to keep him there. It's a time there. I'm appreciative that Dykes gets to stay here, but like you've raised the floor. Can you elevate the ceiling here? I'm a little bit dubious of that, but that's neither here nor there. And on that note, you missed your mark. Cody Campbell and Brett Yormark are going at it over Texas Tech playing on Friday nights. It's stupid, and we're going to touch it on this. So Texas Tech's big booster is Cody Campbell. He played offensive line there for the Red Raiders in the early 2000s under Mike Leach. There's supposedly an October 18th game between the Red Raiders and Houston that's going to be on a Friday night on Fox. And Campbell took umbrage of this because, like, look, high school football is sacred in Texas. He said, Friday night lights are sacred in the great state of Texas. It's absolutely absurd that the Big 12 Conference and Fox Sports would consider scheduling Texas Tech and Houston on a Friday night. I know that Brett Yormark is not a native Texan, but he's been here long enough to know better. Come on, man. And then Yormark told the Lubbock Avalanche Journal, which that's an amazing paper name. Cody Campbell does not run the Big 12. And then obviously Yormark's also played a part in, Texas Tech having to get rid of, throwing tortillas on the field because the fines are absurd. Um, I think Joey McGuire has also said, at the facility since he took over in 2022, he says everything runs through Lubbock. Um, And then Yormark said, Campbell also said Yormark's not the dictator of the conference. Campbell told ESPN as a commissioner, he needs to remember that he works for the presidents and the presidents work for the boards. He is not the dictator of the conference. That is not his role. It is his responsibility to advocate for the members in all cases. And then Yormark would say Friday night Big 12 games outperformed the conference's average rating by 64% to the 2025. All of our schools are treated equally during the TV scheduling. Process fits the games within our school's parameters. I'm thankful for our TV partners for these opportunities. And there's been a bunch of schools that have played games on Friday, not including Thanksgiving. Like Houston's played five, TCU's played four. Um, but like Texas Tech's not played one. I don't think they had Baylor on there as well. Look, I'm gonna take a sip of coffee here before I unpack this. This is wild. I think wish Cody was here. He would have some thoughts about this for sure. So me and the Arizona State podcast, we are finishing up season 5 at Fargo. We're gonna try to do this all before we go to Germany. We got 2 episodes left, season 5. The villain in this fifth season is John Hamm. He plays a constitutional sheriff named Roy Tillman up there in North Dakota. He basically uses the Bible to justify whatever he's doing, and he just basically gets away with everything. Very right wing, very unsettling, not a good person at all. I'm not saying Cody Campbell is that, but like it kind of feels like the power broker, the guy who's got more money than God, just an oil magnate here, is trying to strong arm Brett Yormark. And look, I have to be totally honest with you here. There's only one program in the Big 12 that like truly carries gravitas in sports. That's Kansas in basketball. Like everything else, there's value there, but you're not talking about a traditional power in the sport. You're not talking about like you're not talking about Ohio State, Michigan, Georgia. You're not talking about there's no team in the Big 12 right now in college football that's a top 15 program. Like the closest, it's not even Oklahoma State. Like you don't have anything that's equivalent to Auburn. You don't have anything that's equivalent to Oregon. You don't have anything equivalent to Washington. Like BYU is a really strong brand because it's got the LDS following here, and there's other teams out there that have had success. But it's just the epitome of new money here with Cody Campbell, Joe McGuire, Texas Tech, and the Big 12. Like outside of Mike Leach, you weren't really anything prior to the 50s. And we used to make fun of Texas Tech. Alicia Derritola Castillo and her husband Michael Castillo used to say, "Is this game going to be Big 12 bad?" We're like, there's going to be a lot of points. There's going to be absolutely no defense. They would use that to talk about, USC football. And they're ironic because they've got a Texas Tech guy there, and they've dealt with that firsthand for 5 years with Lincoln Riley, good, bad, and ugly. It's Stockholm syndrome, whatever it is. But look, under Campbell, they invest heavily in the defensive line, so it's different. It's a different sort of feel. If they would have had a quarterback who could play worth a damn, it wasn't Baron Morton Salt. If they had Brendan Sorsby last year, maybe they beat Oregon. Maybe they go further in the playoff. Maybe they could do that this year. I'm very bullish on Texas Tech here. But you're not at a place where the TV partners need to jump through hoops for Texas Tech football. You're not there. There's nobody in this conference that deserves that praise. The only thing is like, let's not put BYU on a Sunday. Like, and they've said like that was kind of the big holdup for BYU coming to you know, a Power Four league. It's like we'll do it if we have to. We don't want to do it. And but obviously there's strong religious ties there. We understand all of that. But like you gotta win something, man. Like I don't even think Oregon would have the gravitas to say that. Like, there's maybe like 5 or 6. I don't even know if Georgia could really do that. Georgia or Oklahoma maybe could, but like Ohio State, Notre Dame, Michigan, maybe USC could, but USC would play on Friday nights and stuff like that. Look, there's going to be times throughout the season where there's going to be so many great games on Saturday. And yes, it would have. I think Texas Tech and Houston's going to be a fantastic game next year. I wish it wasn't on a Friday night, but you know what? That's going to be a game that people are going to have their eyes on. They're like, okay, who's for real? Is Texas Tech going to go back and win the league again? Is Houston going to challenge them? You got to have like you got to cut into like the NFL a little bit. And look, I do the Blog Dirty podcast. You can definitely check that out on Wednesday. Have one coming up this Wednesday, taking a week off of that for me to go to Germany. Then I'll be back and then we'll touch on other stuff, in May and after the draft and everything like that. What I think is important to understand here is you got to take advantage of your window. You got to make sure, week zero is fantastic. You got to make the playoff good. You got to, if there's opportunities to schedule games on Friday to take some of the market share away from the NFL, then do it because they've reached into your territory. They'll play games on Black Friday. They'll play games on Christmas. They'll play on Thanksgiving, Thursday, Saturday, Sunday, Monday. They don't care. They're greedy. And I don't know if the product's really that good. I mean, the NFL product fluctuates. Some years it's great, some years it's not. And this is a false start, but like I'll say this. Growing up in the 2000s, having the Big East playing a lot of games on Thursday and Friday, watched a lot of those games as a kid. That's how we kind of became familiar with Michael Vick, Michael Bush there at Louisville, Pitt, Syracuse. Like they had a niche there. And obviously Maction in November, that's another one as well. And obviously, look, you probably would want to play on Saturday, but let's be real. Jones AT&T Stadium, like they packed that place. It's not the same as like some of these SEC ones or Big Ten. Unless you're in one of those two leagues, you don't really have ground to stand on. So I appreciate Yormark, trying to step up here and say, you know what, get in line. Money can't solve everything here. We got to build a brand. We got to do good. I think Yormark's done a great job since taking over for Bob Bowlesby of the Big 12. And I'll just leave it at that. And on that note, let's move on to our fourth topic here today with some good bull. Can't believe I'm saying this, but you know what? It makes sense right now. The Swamp is they're going to be renovating Florida Field there, at Ben Hill Griffin Stadium in Gainesville, but it's not going to impact the capacity. And I think this is a really big deal for both Scott Strickland and especially Jon Sumrall. Look, we've seen stadiums get renovated over the years. We've seen like places where like half the end zone's not open. Texas in years past, Vanderbilt, Oregon State. Those are ones that immediately jump to mind. Obviously, Hawaii, they're rebuilding Aloha Stadium in a totally different capacity here. Ryan Field, you get what I'm saying. When you're playing in these stadiums that are like centuries old, like you got to renovate it however you can. But look, Florida's going to have 88,000 people there. Scott Strickland's put a lot of money into other facilities there, but not necessarily the football program. And I don't necessarily know if this means that he's all in on Jon Sumrall. But look, Summerall's coming into Gainesville with a huge chip on his shoulder and a lot of arrogance, believing that he's going to turn Florida around very quickly. He knows he doesn't have the roster to do it right now, but I think if the Gators play up to their potential and they get good quarterback play out of Aaron Philo, they might win 8 games, maybe 9. But and we'll see what happens there. But like again, he's been a job hopper. He's been at Tulane for 2 years. He's been at Troy for 2 years. Those, Troy's one of the better G6 programs. Tulane's having its best run as a G6 in a while. Kind of riding the coattails there of what's his name? You're kind of riding the coattails of Willie Fritz and Neil Brown there in Troy prior to that. But it's important to understand like if he really wants to be able to succeed, he's got to have the home crowd be a factor here. I mean, that's how he beat Texas last year. And Summerall seems to be a very fiery personality, or at least a jar a little bit when he's in the podium and everything like that. Um, but like if he's playing for like a less than capacity crowd and the team's not playing well, people are going to tune him out very quickly. So I applaud Scott Strickland and everybody else like that within the University of Florida Regents to make this happen. It's not going to be easy. I mean, there's going to be some challenges there. Obviously, you got to do like a home and home kind of neutral site thing for the cocktail party. You got a date in Athens, Atlanta, and you got a date in Tampa while Jacksonville's getting renovated. The Jaguars are going to play in Orlando this year. I think that's the idea of that what's going to be going on there for the Jags. But look, it's just I think this matters a lot for Jon Sumrall because you got to have good equity. You got to build up, confidence. Look, let me put it this way. Florida's a program. I'm gonna take a sip of coffee here to make sure I get this absolutely right. These solo shows can be challenging. Look at me drinking out of a Georgia Alumni Cup. Talking about Florida. When you are at a program like Florida, a traditional power, when you have the right coach, it presents itself very early, oftentimes by midway through year two. Obviously, Indiana, it presented itself in year one. But that was not a traditional power, that's a different sort of thing. So when you're at a program like Auburn or better, you kind of need to see some signs very early on that's going to work. This is the guy. And look, Florida's won national championships, but the bulk of their success came under two people, Steve Spurrier and Urban Meyer. They've had some relative success prior to that, but like they weren't winning SEC championships under anybody else. This is not an easy job. You can win here, but like it'll pull back quickly. It's probably more closer to what LSU is, I think, than other teams in the SEC where like a lot of people win. A lot of people win at Georgia. A lot of people win at Texas. A lot of people win at Alabama. A lot of people win at Tennessee. A lot of people win at Oklahoma. Every job is different. So just have to view this differently. But Summerall had a lot of other options. I think Florida's the best job of them. I think Auburn's a little bit too chaotic. I think Alex Golesh is going to have some challenges there in year one down in the plains. But look, Summerall's a guy that Cody and I have been very, very high on throughout the entire time we've been doing the show for over 3 years. I mean, obviously it's tough for me rooting for him because he's at Florida now, but like we see what he's doing and we think this works. The question now is, can he overcome some of Florida's nonsense? I will give Scott Strickland credit for making this happen with, giving his head coach the best opportunity to succeed. That's huge. And maybe this will contribute to an extra win or so for Florida this year. But I think the downside is like if you didn't have full capacity, that would be very, very problematic there in Gainesville. And on that note, let's get to our penultimate topic here with some TIN10. Excuse me. With Monday being the national championship in college basketball between UConn and Michigan, I'm going to share my 10 favorite national runner-ups in my college football fandom. And again, I'm only going to go back through the BCS era, so 98 to present, just because like I'll have memories of these teams. Scratch my throat. Excuse me. All right. Before I begin, I'm only going to include one team per school. So, like, yeah, there's been a lot of Clemson's and Oklahoma's and Ohio States and whomever who's lost national championships. But I'm only going to do one, and I'm going to mention each of these 10 teams kind of like they had a profound effect on me growing up and becoming a fan. So at number 10, I've got the 1999 Virginia Tech Hokies. They lost to Florida State, led by Bobby Bowden, head coach, Chris Winkie at quarterback, Peter Warwick, wide receiver, that team. When I think of this Virginia Tech team, again, this is when obviously I'm from Atlanta. I'm a Falcons fan. I do a Falcons podcast. This is kind of the beginning of the Michael Vick experience, if you will. And obviously, this team is very important for Virginia Tech because, like, we're going to potentially see maybe another crest for them under James Franklin, but like we hold the late 90s, early 2000s of Virginia Tech teams in such high regard, dominating the Big East because they had a transcendent quarterback in Vic, they had an all-time head coach in Frank Beamer, and they dominated a different league that doesn't really exist anymore. And the reason like I want to remember this team, again, I don't remember a whole hell of a lot of players here, but like I think just for my generation, that era of Hokies football has become like the new standard. So it's hard to explain to like someone in Gen Z or younger like what Virginia Tech was. I think anybody who was a millennial that grew up and saw this knows what it's about. Anybody who's like from Gen X or older is like, oh yeah, Virginia Tech had a moment. But like prior to me, I didn't think Virginia Tech was ever bad. They were not very good program prior to Beamer getting there. And I think it just kind of goes to show where even if you have everything working together, the right quarterback, right head coach, right conference, right everything, there are limits to this. And even though there's talent there in the Tidewater region, as outlined by Vic and others who come over, you kind of wonder like there are teams out there in college football that just can't win a national title. Like if that team couldn't, I don't know if any Virginia Tech team ever will. But that doesn't mean you can't celebrate these teams. You can't enjoy these teams. And just the fact that they even got there at that point, it just kind of shows like even if you've got everything going, if a program like Florida State's got everything going, they can get to a level you can't. So I still think very fondly of that era of Virginia Tech, but obviously there's levels to this. At number nine, I've got the 2014 Oregon Ducks. They lost to the Ohio State Buckeyes in the first college football playoff. This is kind of where my um my criticism of Oregon football started. And again, I could have talked about the 2010 team that lost Auburn, the Chip Kelly, whatever it was, but like I distinctly remember the 2014 team. Marcus Mariota is the star quarterback. He wins the Heisman Trophy, put up a lot of stats. Didn't really have any memorable games for me. I think he played very well. He played very well in the Rose Bowl to beat Florida State, defending national champion, never hadn't lost. Jameis's only loss of his career. His best game, I think, during the regular season was over Oregon State in Civil War, but like Oregon State was awful at that point. Um, this was like I just didn't trust them, and I kind of wondered like if Oregon was ever going to develop that killer instinct they need to win a national title. I saw the resources kind of going into them. This how we're maybe viewing Texas Tech right now is kind of how I view Oregon then. We're like we want to see them do it, and I think that maybe they could under Dan Lanning. They did seem to play with a certain level of toughness for a while last year. They were in Indiana and just couldn't do a damn thing versus them. But I just this is kind of where like the seeds were planted right before the first year before I start writing. Like I'm gonna doubt Oregon, and whenever I try to be all in on them, they disappoint me. Like the Cowboys. There's always a team like that in every sport, and that's how that was. At number eight, I've got the 2011 LSU Tigers. They lost to Alabama. This is a team that was phenomenal on defense. Tyrann Mathieu was a sophomore fielding punts. This was really the first year that I really got into college football as an adult. You know, Georgia had a great year under Mark Richt, won the SEC East. Aaron Murray really found his own as a quarterback. Play, you know, LSU in the SEC championship. Couldn't do anything versus them offensively. That LSU defense was absolutely stacked. I think, but Patrick Peterson might have been on that team. I'm trying to think who else. Um, I think that sounds about right. Maybe I'm wrong there. Les Miles' best team, and he won a national championship in '07. But like when I think about that era of LSU football, it kind of showed me like this was like, you know, SEC speed, SEC defense. Like there wasn't really anything anybody else could do against them. They got Alabama got them in the rematch, like the game of the century. I think they won like 9-6 beforehand, just all defensively. And this was one of those seasons where I think the college football playoff kind of it happened. Like this was like one of those years where like we needed it. I would say '04, '07, 11 and 12 were like the three that were like the four that were like, okay, we need to probably go in this direction because there was other teams out there that didn't get an opportunity to play for a national championship. You know, '04, you know, Auburn didn't get to play for one. '07, you know, West Virginia and Georgia. 11, Oklahoma State didn't get a chance. 12, Georgia didn't get a chance. There's teams like that we think could do it. But I think that LSU team in 2011 it just was so pitiful on offense they couldn't do anything. And you know, it's interesting that 8 years later they had the best offense of all time with Joe Burrow, and they ended up going with Jordan Jefferson, Justin Jefferson, just some changes of Jeffersons. How quickly that thing changed there at LSU. It just kind of shows that, like, you know, with the Broncos with 2013 with Peyton Manning, a prolific offense, and by 15, his neck didn't work and he couldn't throw the football. So it shows that you could adapt, but also you can't be completely one-sided win a national championship. That's what I learned from that team. At number seven, I've got my first of like three teams that I think kind of check this box. I got the 2002 Miami Hurricanes. They lost to Ohio State in the national championship. Remember this very vividly when I was a kid. This was kind of like me first getting Sports Illustrated, reading them in middle school and everything like that. Um, Miami, for most of my younger years, was a dominant program. The '80s till that point. That loss for Miami set them back. Like I feel like that team was so loaded. Not that they like lost their identity. They eventually did, probably because you know it's the extended wake of Larry Coker not being Butch Davis, and who surprisingly didn't win a national championship in Miami, but he went to Cleveland, so that's good for him, I guess. that was kind of an inflection point where like Miami pulled back and Ohio State ascended. Prior to that, Ohio State, like, yeah, my mom was from Columbus. I knew Ohio State was good in like the 70s and prior to that, but like 90s wasn't really a special decade for them. That was Jim Tressel's first national championship. You had Williams Claret in the backfield, Craig Krenzel at quarterback, Chris Campbell playing both ways. AJ Hawk was a young linebacker on that team. Um, and then Ohio State's pretty much been on top of college football or in the discussion outside the one Luke Fickell year pretty much the entire time. Miami they left the Big East, went to the ACC, still have never won the ACC, made the playoff, play for a national championship last year, and a couple of decent years there in between. But like that just kind of goes to show like when a heavy favorite loses in that magnitude, granted, it was very controversial. There was a controversial play on the goal line that ended up giving the national championship to Ohio State. When that happens, you pull back, and it can ding anybody, you know. That's kind of been a common thread throughout college football. It's like, how does the fan base react to that? At number six, I've got the 2005 USC Trojans. They lost to Vince Young's Texas Tech Longhorns. I almost included the '09 Longhorns because that was another team that really pulled back. They lost to Alabama. Kind of checks the same sort of box here, where like USC under Pete Carroll was incredible. Basically, from Carson Palmer's Heisman year until like things got dicey with like the end of Matt Barkley and the recruiting scandal where Pete Carroll left for Seattle and everything like that. The USC was dominant. Like there's been a couple of eras of college football where like that team is just better than everybody else. It only lasts for about 3 years and then they pull back a little bit. That's just the nature of the beast here. But that era of USC football was loaded. I remember watching that game like during COVID, and I forgot Sam Baker was on the offensive line. Dwayne Jarrett at wide receiver, like, obviously Lindell White, Reggie Bush in the backfield, Matt Leinart at quarterback. Just again, like one of those situations where like there's just a fantastic football game, and then like the team that's loaded, the favorite ends up losing. Again, they pull back a little bit there. So I remember the USC team very fondly, but like that was kind of the beginning then for them. And then number five, got the 2021 Alabama Crimson Tide. They lost to my Georgia Bulldogs. I remember that game vividly because, well, it was only like 5 years ago, 4 or 5 years ago. And obviously, my team won its first national title in 41 years. Go Dogs. Take a sip of coffee real quick before I unpack that. From from '08 until 2021, Alabama was just the end all be all. I distinctly remember when they beat Georgia in the blackout game in '08, fall of '08. I'm like, oh, they're back. Nick Saban's here. I'm like, this is nothing we're going to be. I'm like, this is going to be a problem for a very long time. I distinctly remember that as an 18-year-old, 18 or 19-year-old. Like, and up until my 30s, like they were a problem for a very long time. They won a bunch of national titles. They won what? 9, 11, 12, 15, 17, and 20. So they won 6 national titles. I haven't won one since this game. Bryce Young was the star quarterback there for the Crimson Tide. He won the Heisman Trophy that year. Um, yeah. And then Willie Anderson Jr. was the star linebacker for them out in the edge, like their best pass rusher since what, like Cornelius Bennett or um, Derek Thomas, just a freak. I mean, Bill O'Brien was a good offensive coordinator for them. Pete Golding on defense. It just kind of goes to show. I think that's like not necessarily coaching attrition would really played a part in that, but like sometimes like sustaining something that long, like eventually someone will beat you. And maybe we saw that with the Patriots under Belichick when the Titans beat him in back at like 19 or something like that. And then you come back and you can redo it, but like Alabama's not been the same program since this loss. They made the playoff. I think when they made it in 23, they lost in the Rose Bowl. They made it last year. They beat Oklahoma in a rematch and they got crushed by Indiana. Kalen DeBoer is in charge now. And I don't necessarily think it got decadent like the degree that Texas did in '09, which why I don't think I put them on here. But like it was one of those things where like we haven't seen it really fall off yet because we did see that with USC. We did see that with Miami. And I don't necessarily know if we're going to ever see that with Alabama, but like this is significant. And then at number four, I've got the 2024 Notre Dame Fighting Irish. They lost to Ohio State. Okay, this was only a couple of years ago. So and they played the national championship on a really, really, really cold night here in Atlanta. I got sick right afterwards. It was great. Me and my fiance got the flu. It was a great time here in Virginia Highland. But that was the first Notre Dame team that I felt was likable. Marcus Freeman gave them a certain cool factor that kind of overcame the whole national independent, uh, hoity-toity, academic power, Catholic, religious overtones. Like they just had a damn good football team, particularly on defense. Xavier Watts is now thriving for my Atlanta Falcons. He's a phenomenal player. Benjamin Orson, just a talented guy, got hurt there. Obviously, Jeremiah Love is a sensational running back. Riley Leonard was kind of running point there on offense at quarterback. Had two phenomenal coordinators there with Mike Denbrock, who's still there at Notre Dame, and then Al Golden, who's now back with the Bengals. But like throughout most of my life, prior to me being born, Notre Dame was really good under Lou Holtz. They had a few pockets there, in the early 90s, and then obviously the mid 2000s with Brady Quinn and Charlie Weiss and everything like that, Tyron Willingham, I guess, if you will. Then it got kind of weird. Brian Kelly took over. They kind of got it figured out, played for a couple of national titles, in 12 and then 24. But it wasn't really until 18 where like, okay, I think that they're on the level of actually being a serious, playoff caliber team. They made it when in 18 and 20, and then they made it in 24. I think they might have made it another time in between. I'm probably wrong there, but like this was that 24 team was the first time I felt Notre Dame could like, okay, they can actually win a national championship in this era of college football. They're cutting through in a way that they never could under Brian Kelly. And again, like I'm never really gonna root for Notre Dame. Again, I know I'm quoting this on Easter. I'm not Catholic. I'm from the South, dude. Like I'm not this isn't my cup of tea here. Even though if I would have gone to private school, would have gone to Marist School, which is where Sean McVay went, and obviously that's Kyle Hamilton went there too. That would be something. But like this Notre Dame team became likable, and I didn't think that was possible. And that was a team that like I thought could have given Ohio State more of a shot, but that team caught fire under Ryan Day. At number three, I got the 2013 Auburn Tigers. Again, my sister's an Auburn alum. She was a sophomore that year. I was 24 or something like that at that point. I distinctly remember going to Auburn for the Georgia game for the Deep South Souls rivalry. That was the Prairie Jordan Hare game. Then the following week there was Kick Six. My sister's not really a football fan. She's just doing her own thing, whatever. She like that season was special because the year prior, fall 2012, Auburn was awful. They went like 3-9. It was Kyle Frazier. And then 2 years before they won a national title with Cam Newton. And just the end of the Gene Chizik era was bad. They bring back Gus Malzahn, who was the OC of that team from Arkansas State. That Auburn team was not talented. Nick Marshall was a quarterback, Trey Mason at running back, Greg Robinson at offensive tackle. I think maybe Philip Lutzer, I think was still playing tight end for them at that point, maybe. But Sammy Coates, obviously Chris Davis, Carlton Davis. That was kind of Carl Davis is probably the best player on that team. But like their only loss during the regular season was to LSU, a rivalry game. That happens. They beat Georgia, they beat Alabama. And that was kind of what I learned. Like when Auburn gets it rolling and they're playing their rivals at home, it's a tough place to play. They slaughtered Mizzou in the SEC championship game. They get to the final BCS national championship. They run into Jameis Winston and Florida State with Kelvin Benjamin and Devontae Freeman at running back. That team was loaded. They nearly did it. But like that was a true out of nowhere team. And like look, Auburn's a traditional power. They've had really good teams throughout my lifetime. And that's why I hold them to such a higher standard because like I know what they're capable of. But that team in Gus Malzahn's first year, I caught everybody by surprise. He had a really good team there in 17, got fired after 20, and Auburn's not been the same since. But as I sit here and I think about it, like when you have one of those teams, that's just a true momentum team. Even if you are at a traditional power like Auburn, like you'll run out of gas at some point. But I hated every second of it. But like that team was different. That was they are the winning team and the greatest play in college football history on Kick Six. Like and to have that after Prairie Jordan Hare, where it's like that's another iconic moment. Like college football is just different. And the fact that Alabama was at the peak of its powers, Georgia was still kind of believing that maybe they could do something under Mark Richt. There were other teams out there. Tennessee was awful. LSU was still really good. Arkansas had still hadn't quite hit the fan yet. Was about to. It just an interesting time there, man, and that team was certainly doing it. I mentioned number two. I've got the 2022 TCU Horned Frogs who lost to my Georgia Bulldogs, the national championship. They got smushed like a bug. But this is the true like team that was like out of nowhere. They had moved on from Gary Patterson, the iconic head coach in program history. First year at Sonny Dykes, who had like one good year at Cal, maybe something else at La Tech. But Chandler Morris was going to be the starting quarterback for them. He gets hurt. It's Max Duggan, and Chandler Morris was going to be on the show. He got his seventh year of eligibility denied because apparently him hurting his ankle ruined his mental health that year. And they're like, no. So yeah, I found a way to make that into the show here. But what's important to understand here is that team, the Hypnotoads, they just kind of did it. They didn't win the Big 12 that year. Kansas State did. They still made the playoff anyway because they were undefeated heading into that title bout. And they beat Michigan in the Fiesta Bowl in a game where like Michigan just threw up all over itself. That's kind of where my beginning of the end for like I don't believe in JJ McCarthy at all. And you look at like Quentin Johnston was like the best player on TCU, and he was a bust for the Chargers. Maybe he'll figure it out at some point, but like the returns haven't been the same for him. Sometimes you truly catch lightning in a bottle. And look, this is kind of the same sort of thing with Virginia Tech. I don't know if TCU is ever going to win a national championship. It just may not be in the cards. Whereas Auburn has, and Auburn can, and Auburn will win national titles again. But we'll see when that day and age arises. But like TCU figured it out, man, and that was a fun team to follow from afar. And then I knew like Georgia's have to play them at some point. That's not going to be good. And then finally, I've got the 2017 Georgia Bulldogs. Taking a sip of coffee here before I finish this up and then get to our last segment and get out of here. That was Kirby Smart's second year back at his alma mater. Every year from that year on, Georgia has been good enough to be in the year six, or they would have made a 12-team playoff in every year at that point. First year at Georgia, it was a little bit of bumpy road. Jacob Eason starting as a true freshman quarterback. You lose to Vanderbilt. You lose at home to Georgia Tech. And there was a moment where, like, you saw Harrison Butker and all the delightful bees messing with the hedges. And that landed in the minds of Nick Chubb and Sonny Michel. And, like, we're going to come back. We're going to fix this. Davin Bellamy came back as well. I'm trying to think. There was somebody else that was a big key person coming back. Those are the big three that I remember. Like they were leaders in that team. Like we're gonna do this. Georgia beats like App State, and then like I think what Easton gets hurt, and Jake Fromm comes in. He wins on the road at Notre Dame. That's Terry Godwin, and then Georgia. We might have lost like what one game during the regular season, I think. They beat Auburn. Yeah, they lost Auburn that year down at Jordan Hare. That was a really good Auburn team, headlined by a phenomenal linebacker. I'm blanking on his name. Roquan Smith is on that Georgia team too. Um, they go and they beat Auburn in the SEC championship. Jarrett Stidham is the quarterback there for the Tigers. Then they go to the playoff. They beat Oklahoma. They end Baker Mayfield's career. Give him a lot of points. There's a 50-something yard field goal off the leg of Rodrigo Blankenship, who I'll touch on later. Um, then that helps it up. Georgia went to overtime at the Rose Bowl, beat Oklahoma, and Sonny Michel's greatest play. Then they get to the national championship in 2017. They play Alabama in the Benz. And because Alabama lost to Auburn that year, I think, as well. They might have had, I don't know how the hell they got there. Anyway, Tyler Simmons was onside, and I thought they were going to do it. I thought Georgia was going to win the national championship that year. And then second and 26 happened, and Tua Tagovailoa found Devontae Smith, and that was that. But it was one of those moments where like Georgia hadn't been in a national championship conversation, hadn't played for one since like the mid 80s. So the first time in my entire life they did. And that was kind of where like the Georgia sports curse really started, to snowball. This is after 28-3. This is after the infield fly rule for the Braves. So many horrible basketball, baseball, football memories just of my fandom that ultimately led me to write about this. Like my teams are so stinking cursed. I got to write about this. Got to figure out to do this. And then 4 years later, they finally got it done. And even though Nick Chubb and Sonny Michel and them they didn't get to win a national title, they helped set the tone for what it means to be playing for Kirby Smart. And the cool part was like they weren't smart guys. They came in to play for Richt, and they helped transition for that. And I think without them, I don't necessarily think the program is going to be in the same spot it is now. I don't know if they win the national titles. And obviously, everything evolves. You know, we're looking at Georgia being what 3 years removed since its last national championship. They could do it this year. Remains to be seen. But like that team was held in very high regard. And I would say this past year's team too as well, just differently. Like that 2017 team was talented enough to win it all. Last year's team, maybe not, but that team was so well coached. And obviously 21 was really special and 22 was just a filthy team. And that's what I got with that. And on that note, let's get out of here with some 404, a guy remembering dudes. So yesterday was 404 day in Atlanta. April 4th. That's the obviously the area code for the business's numbers here. There's also 770, and something else, and this is false start. But a very went to go pick my fiance up from work or walk her back. It was Beltline was popping off. It was a time. But I'm gonna remember four players who grew up locally in Atlanta who had star college careers that I would have remember. I'm gonna start here with a former Westlake star, Florida, Blinn College, and Auburn, and obviously, the Carolina Panthers and New England Patriots, Cam Newton. Look, his 1 year at Auburn is one of the greatest things I've ever seen. And like, I do not like Auburn. I do not care for Cam Newton. He's played for the enemy three times for me with Florida, Auburn, and Carolina. Like, and the Patriots too, if you want to throw them in there as well. Just there hasn't quite been anything I've seen before since where guys just truly carrying an entire team. 2010 team, like it was him and Nick Fairley and a few other people, Michael Dyer, the late Philip Lutziker kind of coming on and tied in a little bit as well. But like just a guy who there's nothing anybody could do. And just a polarizing figure every since the word. He had a couple of great years there with the Panthers too. He's not an NFL Pro Football Hall of Famer. He's a college football Hall of Famer and every since the word. Just like the only other things I can compare this to is probably Joe Burrow in 2019, and then maybe what 88 with Barry Sanders, where like this guy's just better than everybody else. And I think obviously Joe Burrow had more talent around him. So I think what Cam Newton did in a national championship season was just unbelievable, and I don't think it'll ever be replicated. Phenomenal player for Auburn. Next up, I've got former Kel Longhorns running back, Georgia Tech running back, played for the NFL briefly with the Steelers and Cardinals, Jonathan Dwyer. So so I grew up in East Cobb, and there are six high schools there, public high schools that we define as East Cobb. You've got Walton where I went, you've got Pope, Lassiter, Sprayberry, Kell, and Wheeler. Those are all like those are the six high schools. You've got Roswell, Campbell. There's other ones, and Etowah is not that far away, just a different vicinity. There are a lot of public high schools there in Georgia. But when you're in East Cobb, like for the most part, like it's a very affluent suburb of Atlanta. It's an unincorporated community between Marietta and Roswell. You don't always have the best athletes. Football is usually pretty good. Walton's usually got some teams. Blasters, that's where Hudson Mason played. Sprayberry's had some teams. Wheeler's kind of more of a basketball power. TJ Yates played at Pope. But Dwyer at Kell was still a relatively new school. It's the youngest of the six. And he was the guy they named after Corky Kell. That's where the Corky Kell Classic, former longtime Wheeler head coach. Dwyer just was different. Dwyer, I remember playing him as like, yeah, he's just running all over us. Jarek McKinnon was kind of like that too, a little bit Sprayberry, but Dwyer was like a year or two above me. And he went to Georgia Tech when Georgia Tech was still, pre, triple option with Paul Johnson, I think, kind of Chan Gailey, that kind of era. I think initially he was going to play at Florida. Georgia didn't want him, but it's just a different sort of time where like Rick's recruiting was a little bit interesting. And obviously Dwyer has had some, legal issues in the past in his post playing career and everything like that. But when he was at Cal, man, he was the first guy that I saw where I'm like, yeah, this is a man among boys. There's really nothing we can do. Next up, I got another guy who is the biggest man of men who can do. That would be former Grayson star, former Ole Miss star, former Arizona Cardinals first round pick, Robert Nkemdiche. A little bit younger than me. And like I did this in terms of like age. I think Cam Newton and Jonathan Dwyer are like a year or two above me, not by much. Robert Kimdiche played at Grayson. So Walton, my alma mater, played Grayson in the highest levels state championship. Walton's never won one yet. When I was like went to the Final Four, I think when I was in '08 and then in '05. Then that's kind of remember. But in 13, I think it was 12 or 13. I'm trying to remember what it was. I don't care. Kimdiche, his older brother Denzel went to go play at Ole Miss. Because I think Hugh Freeze got him in there. And the Ceviche is like, we're going to play together. So that was kind of always like how they were able to get the number one recruit in the country, defensive tackle, running back out of Grayson. And obviously, Ceviche's recruiting class with Laquan Treadwell and Larry Tunstall was kind of dirty. But that was the one with Ceviche where I'm like, I get it. He wants to play for his brother. Treadwell's from Chicago. What's he know about Ole Miss? And then Tunstall, that was a whole other can of worms there. My sister watched him, and Mookie Blaylock's two sons were like the stars of the 13 team or 12 or 13 team, and he's like, yeah, KBJ is just absolute animal, just absolutely destroying people. Did the same sort of thing there with Ole Miss, and then obviously he's had some legal stuff, fell out of a window. Really hope he turns his life around right now. It's really challenging for him, but this is a guy that was like, in terms of like high school quarterback, not quarterback, non-quarterback players from Metro Atlanta era, just different, just a different sort of player. And wish it could have worked out for more of the pros, but like, you know, this is just life. It just kind of goes to show, even if the best people you're going up against, there's millions of other people in the world where like they're just maybe better than you. Kimdiche was insane at Grayson and Ole Miss. And then finally, I'm gonna go with my guy, Rodrigo Blankenship, former Sprayberry kicker, former Georgia kicker, kicked with Colts. So, and I gotta do this. I've mentioned this on the show. So Rodrigo's father, Coach Blankenship, was a soccer coach and special teams coach in my high school. Doesn't remember me. Why would he? Rodrigo's probably about 5 or 6, 7 years younger than me. Um, and Coach Blankenship would take seventh period off, so he'd have Rodrigo get off of school. They'd go to the practice field behind the field house, kick field goals. And I think it came down to a point where like he's like, my kid's ready to kick on varsity. And it's like the Walton was like, no, we got a senior guy who's been biding his time. He's like, screw it, I'm gonna go get a job at Sprayberry. And he goes to Sprayberry. That's the school where Trey Sermon and Jabari Zuniga played at. And did great things there playing for Billy Shackelford. Comes to Georgia again, like the first grows a winner in Georgia history, made a bunch of clutch kicks there, 17. I think the only thing was like the 19-1 was like he missed a field goal versus South Carolina home. That was Georgia's like second most recent home loss. They lost to Alabama, I think, but this past year. But like just and then Kirby Smart put him on scholarship. Everybody put him up there. Obviously, very small, like 6 foot, 150 pounds, dripping wet, bottlenose glasses. And it just kind of shows that like, football's for everybody. Football can be for anybody, however you want to do this. It's just a unique looking person, just a very unique dude. But he was really, really good at kicking. And I think more importantly, like Georgia legend. Like people like of the Kirby Smart era, if we talk about like top 10, 12, 15 players, he's absolutely among them. And I think everybody was like, oh, this guy was ridiculously good. Like, and even though, we've had like other phenomenal kickers like Jack Posledney, Marshall Morgan, God, I'm trying to think who the hell is a kicker now. Rodrigo Blankenship just cut through in a way that I don't think that there's anybody else in there. Um, Phenomenal player, just really, really good at Georgia. Wish his NFL career would have lasted longer, but that's just the way it goes sometimes. And on that note, this was episode 265 of False Start. You can follow me, John Buhler, on Twitter at X at Buhler118. You can follow my absent-minded, absent co-host, Cody Williams at TheSizzle20. You can follow the show at CFB False Start. Like, rate, listen, subscribe, review on Apple, Spotify, YouTube, anywhere there's podcasts. Give us a 5-star review. Really helps the show grow. Pay us on Buzzsprout, whatever. We got appreciate all listeners now. I think we can monetize right through the ads. So if these are coming up on your feed, just know that we've been putting in the work. Just listen to it. Help us out. Do whatever you can here. Again, Cody and I will be back on the show, the midweek one for on Wednesday, recording for Thursday. By the time that comes out, I'll be in Germany, and he's going to keep this thing going until we do 3 hours in a cloud of punt after the first round of the 2026 NFL Draft. It's going to be great. It's going to be amazing. It's going to be a false start. Once again, thanks for listening, and this is False Start.